Have you ever wondered what really hides behind the facade of power and wealth? What happens when the luxurious world of a billionaire collides with the invisible life of those who serve it? This is not a story about money. It's about buried secrets, hidden lives, and such a shocking truth that it can change everything in the blink of an eye. The scene unfolds in one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, where the sound of silver cutlery and discreet conversations fill the air. On an isolated table, Arthur Blackwood, a man whose fortune is exceeded by his relentless reputation. For him, the world is a chessboard, and he never loses. But that night, a simple waitress was about to checkmate in her perfectly controlled universe. Her name was Leah. Young, exhausted, but with a silent dignity, she approached Arthur's table, unaware that she was walking toward the epicenter of a storm. A small error in the order was the trigger. Arthur's fury exploded, cold and sharp. Her words echoed through the hall, publicly humiliating her for an insignificant failure. Each client was shrinking, feeling the weight of that cruelty. Leah, head down, just whispered excuses, trying to contain the tears. But then something extraordinary happened. At the height of his anger, Arthur stopped. His look, once full of contempt, froze. It was not for Leah's frightened face that he looked, but for something that was gently shining on his neck. A necklace. A necklace he knew better than his own breath. The anger on his face gave way to a mask of shock and confusion. That necklace could not be. He himself put him around his late wife years ago, on a sunny day, who now seemed to belong to another life. As, like that jewel, a symbol of his lost love, ended up in the neck of an unknown waitress. The atmosphere has changed instantly. The silence in the restaurant became dense, loaded with an unaided question. Arthur, with his voice now trembling, asked the only question that mattered. Where did you get it?" Leah's response, innocent and frightened, only deepened the mystery, lighting the flame of a search desperate for the shocking truth. Arthur did not know, but as he shouted with that waitress, he was not just starting a fight. He was about to unravel a secret that connected his painful past to that young man's hidden life in a way that no one could imagine. And the truth behind that necklace was much more complex and moving than he would never dare to dream. What really happened to your wife's necklace? And what was the secret connection between these two women from such different worlds? The answer was closer than he thought and was about to come out. The answer was closer than he thought and was about to come out. Now imagine yourself in Arthur's place for a moment. You are in a restaurant, the world at your feet, and suddenly the ghost of your greatest love reappears in the most unlikely way. Or put yourself in Leah's place, publicly humiliated, just to see your aggressor freeze in front of your mother's only legacy. What would you do in such a situation? If it was Arthur, would you investigate this mystery to the end, no matter what cost? And if it were Leah, how would it react to the sudden obsession of that powerful man for his most precious good? Leave your opinion here in the comments, because the way this story unfolds is breathtaking. Arthur's journey to discover the truth behind the necklace and the secret connection with Leah's life is just beginning. Each step will take you deeper into a maze of memories, regrets, and revelations that will change your life forever. In order not to lose a single detail of this exciting story and find out the surprising outcome, leave your like to help us bring more content like this. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. You will not want to be left out when the shocking truth is finally revealed in our next video. Arthur's journey to discover the truth behind the necklace and the secret connection with Leah's life is just beginning. Each step will take you deeper into a maze of memories, regrets, and revelations that will change your life forever. Back in the restaurant, the echo of Arthur's cruel words still hovered in the air, but the energy had changed dramatically. The silence that was installed was heavier than any scream. The other customers, once shocked by Billionaire's arrogance, were now paralyzed by the confusion. What could have caused such an abrupt change? Arthur Blackwood, the business titan known for his steel composure, was visibly shaken, pale face and fixed eyes on the delicate necklace that adorned the young waitress' neck. Leah, in turn, felt the world turn. A moment so far, she was the target of a public humiliation. Now it was the center of intense and indecipherable attention. She instinctively took her hand to the necklace, a protective gesture towards the only valuable inheritance her mother had left her. With a shaky, almost unrecognizable voice, Arthur repeated the question, "The necklace, where did you get it?" Leah, still scared, answered with the simple truth. "It was from my mother. That's all I have from her." The simplicity of the answer hit Arthur as a wave. Her mother. The phrase opened a new corridor in his mind, a dark corridor he had not visited for years. Unable to pronounce another word, he threw a few $100s on the table, much more than the amount of the account, and hurried out of the restaurant, leaving behind a trail of curious eyes and a waver in shock. Outside, the cold air of the night was not enough to lighten your mind. He entered his Rolls-Royce, but did not start. The hands that commanded a multi-billionaire empire now trembled on the leather steering wheel. He closed his eyes, and the image came, clear and painful. A flashback, not for a ballroom or a charity gala, but for a bedroom-sterile hospital with the smell of antiseptic in the air. It was the room where his beloved wife Helena spent her last days. He remembered her weak smile, the way she held her hand, and the day he gave her that necklace. It was their wedding anniversary, and even there, in that dark atmosphere, the glow of the jewelry brought a momentary light in her eyes. It was the symbol of a promise, that they would overcome it, that they would have more sunny days, a promise that life did not allow it to fulfill. That necklace disappeared after Helena's death. In the midst of the overwhelming pain and the following administrative chaos, the jewelry simply disappeared. Arthur assumed that he had been lost, perhaps taken by mistake with the hospital's belongings. He never actively sought her. The pain was too big to even touch the subject. But now, seeing her around the neck of a stranger, it was not a coincidence. It was a ghost. With a sudden movement, he took the phone and called his trusted man, a former intelligence agent who now acted as his security boss and solving of problems. "Mark," said Arthur, his firm voice again, but with an urgency that Mark rarely heard. "I need you to find everything about a waitress. Her name is Leah. She works at the Grand Oak. Everything, Mark. Where she lives, who is her family, where she came from, and above all, find out who her mother was. I want the report on my table tomorrow morning." Across the line, Mark, accustomed to eccentric requests and corporate investigations, felt that this time it was different. It was personal. While Billionaire's research machine was set in motion, Leah's life remained relentless pace. She ended her shift with the incident spinning in her head. Who was that man? Why did he look at his necklace like that? Arriving home, a small apartment in a modest part of the city, the reality hit her. The lit lights meant that his grandmother, the only family left, was still awake, waiting for her. Leah's grandmother was a fragile woman whose weakened health required constant care and expensive medicines. Leah's salary barely covered expenses, and she lived in a perpetual state of financial anxiety. She sat next to her grandmother's bed, who noticed her worried countenance. "What is it, my dear?" asked the lady with a weak voice. Leah hesitated, but ended up telling about the strange man and his reaction to the necklace. In mentioning the jewel, her grandmother looked at the necklace with a melancholy affection. "Your mother loved this necklace," she said. "It was a gift from a very special friend she made in a difficult time. A good soul," she said. "They promised to take care of each other even from afar." That was the story that Leah always heard, but the details were vague, lost in the mist of her grandmother's memory. The special friend never had a name, just the description of a kind woman with a sad smile. The next morning, a thick and confidential envelope was on Arthur's polished mahogany table. He opened it with a feverish urgency. Inside were photos of Leah, your address, records of your job, and finally the section about your family. A death certificate. Leah's mother's name was Sophia, and the place of death, the same hospital where Helena had died. At the same time, Arthur's heart began to beat wildly. Mark had included an old photo of Sophia, found in Leah's grandmother's belongings. She was a simple-looking woman, but with a kind look. And next to her, in the faded photo, was another woman, partially cut, but unmistakable. It was Helena. They were together in a garden that Arthur reckoned. He was not the external area of the hospital. Shocking truth began to form in his mind, such a powerful truth that he left him without air. It was not a theft. It was not a coincidence. It was a connection, a hidden life that his wife had in those last days, a forged friendship on the edge of the abyss, about which he knew absolutely nothing. The waitress he humiliated was not a stranger. She was the living link with the final and secret chapter of his wife's life. The anger he felt the night before was replaced by an overwhelming wave of shame and a desperate desire to understand. He needed to talk to Leah again. But this time, it wouldn't be like an arrogant billionaire. It would be like a man in search of redemption, a widower trying to join the pieces of his wife's heartbreak. He took the car keys, not to go to his office, but to the address in the report. He was about to cross the abyss among his worlds, not knowing that the complete story behind that necklace was even more moving than his imagination would dare to allow. He took the car keys, not to go to his glass and steel empire, but to the address in the report. He was about to cross the abyss among his worlds, not knowing that the complete story behind that necklace was even more moving than his imagination would dare to allow. The route to the Leah neighborhood was a journey to another universe. The mirrored skyscrapers that dominated Arthur's horizon gave way to low buildings and narrow streets, where life pulsed in a more raw and real way. For Billionaire, used to moving in a luxury and isolation bubble, each corner was a reminder of the world that he just watched from above. He parked his luxury car, a spaceship on a street with modest vehicles, attracting curious and suspicious looks. For a moment he hesitated. What would he say? How could a man like him, who the night before there was spit poison, now ask for a moment of vulnerability? Helena's face image in the photograph, next to Leah's mother, was the fuel he needed. He was not there for himself. I was there for her. Arthur climbed the stairs of the simple building, feeling the weight of each step. The smell of homemade food and everyday life filled the corridor, a stark contrast to the aseptic silence of his mansion. He stopped in front of the door of Leah's apartment and took a deep breath before knocking. The sound seemed to echo in the silent corridor. Leah opened the door, and her face went through a succession of emotions in seconds: surprise, confusion, and finally fear. Seeing him there, on his door, was the last thing she expected. His first instinct was protected. His grandmother was sick inside. She could not allow that man to bring more disturbance to her home. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice firmer than she felt, blocking the entrance with her body. Arthur saw fear in his eyes, and shame hit him in full force. He lifted his hands on a gesture of peace. "Please," he said, and the word sounded strange in his own mouth, devoid of the usual authority. "I didn't come to cause problems. I need to talk to you about the necklace, about your mother." Upon hearing his mother's mention, Leah's defensive posture has been hesitated. Curiosity surpassed fear. She looked inside to her grandmother's room and then back to him. Reluctantly, she made room for him to enter. The apartment was small, but impeccably clean and tidy. There was a dignity in its simplicity that disarmed Arthur completely. He, a man who negotiated in meetings rooms that were worth more than that entire building, felt an intruder and giant in a dollhouse. His eyes landed on a small table with some pictures. In one of them, he saw the same woman as Mark's report, Sophia, Leah's mother, smiling. "I apologize," began Arthur, the low and sincere voice. "Last night. There is no excuse for my behavior. I was cruel and arrogant, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused you." Leah just nodded, still suspicious. Excuses were easy for rich men. "What does this have to do with my mother?" she asked, going straight to the point. Arthur took a copy of the photo Mark had found from his pocket. Helena and Sophia's photo together in the garden of the hospital. He handed her Leah. "This woman," he said, pointing to Helena. "He was my wife, Helena." Leah looked at the picture and then to Arthur, the confusion deepening on her face. She recognized the woman in the photo. It was the special friend of her grandmother's stories, the kind soul her mother met in her darker days. "I don't understand," she whispered. "They were in the same hospital at the same time," continued Arthur, his voice embargoed by the emotion he struggled to contain. "I didn't know. I had no idea that Helena had made a friend. She never told me." Confession left him vulnerable, exposing a failure in his relationship that he had never admitted to anyone. In his pain and occupation, he was not as present as he should. He lost part of his wife's hidden life. It was at this moment that the bedroom door opened slowly. Leah's grandmother, supported by a cane, appeared in the hallway, attracted to the voices. His eyes, although inebriated by age, widened to see Arthur. But she wasn't looking at his face. He was looking at something he was holding, a small lapel brooch he always wore, a gift from Helena. "The angel," the old lady whispered, the fragile voice as a roll. Arthur and Leah turned to her, surprised. "Helena." "She called him my impatient angel," said the grandmother, looking straight at Arthur. "She spoke of you to Sophia. He said that you had the weight of the world on your shoulders, but the heart of an angel." The revelation hit Arthur as a lightning. Helena talked about him. To Leah's mother, shocking truth was that while he thought Helena was isolating herself in her pain, she was actually sharing her love for him with a new friend. The grandmother, with her memory keen by that unexpected encounter, continued the story that Leah only knew in half. Sophia and Helena, they were inseparable in that hospital, two women from different worlds, united by the same destination. They laughed, cried, and shared secrets that no one else knew. Helena gave Sophia a week before leaving. Arthur felt the tears he held for years finally sprout in his eyes. He approached the lady, skilling slowly to stay at her level, a gesture of humility that shocked Leah. "Why?" he asked, his voice broken. "Why would she give the necklace?" The grandmother smiled, a sad and sweet smile. "It was not just a gift, it was a promise. Helena made Sophia promise that if something happened to her, Sophia would find a way to take care of you. She knew how lost you would be. She said the necklace would be a reminder, a symbol of their friendship and promise. Sophia, in turn, promised, but she was sick soon after. Paced. The revelation climax stopped in the air. The necklace was not just a lost jewel, it was a will, a sacred link between two friendships, two losses, and a promise that crossed death. Arthur finally understood. The waitress he humiliated was not a stranger. She was the guardian of his wife's last promise. The anger, pain, and arrogance that defined it for so long began to dissolve, replaced by an overwhelming and purifying emotion. Gratitude. The revelation climax stopped in the air. The necklace was not just a lost jewel, it was a will, a sacred link between two friendships, two losses, and a promise that crossed death. Arthur finally understood. The waitress he humiliated was not a stranger. She was the guardian of his wife's last promise. The anger, pain, and arrogance that defined it for so long began to dissolve, replaced by an overwhelming and purifying emotion. Gratitude. But to understand the magnitude of that moment, the depth of the transformation that was beginning to occur within that billionaire, we need to go back in time. We need to dive into Arthur Blackwood's past, not the relentless titan of business, but the man who once knew how to love. Arthur was not always the cold and calculating figure that the world knew. There was a time when his empire was secondary, a time when his greatest wealth was not in actions or properties, but in a woman's smile. Helena. They met long before the colossal fortune, when Arthur was just an ambitious young man with dreams greater than his pockets. Helena was the architect of her soul. She saw through her armor, calmed her impatience, and reminded her that real success was not measured in bank digits but in shared moments. It was she who taught him how to appreciate art, music, and silence. As he built an empire, she built a home. And at the center of that home, there was a love that seemed unshakable. The necklace entered its lives in a moment of pure happiness. It was their 10th anniversary of their wedding. Arthur, already a man of immense wealth, could have bought any extravagant jewel, any famous diamond. But Helena was different. She didn't care about the monetary value, but the meaning. Together, they found the necklace in a small, handcrafted jewelry during a trip to a coastal village in Italy. It was a unique, delicate piece, with a small pendant that seemed to contain a star fragment. For them, he symbolized the uniqueness of their love, a treasure that only they understood. To see swimming him in her neck under the Mediterranean sun, Arthur felt that he had captured happiness in its purest form. So life, as you usually do, presented your account. Helena's diagnosis came as a thief at night, silent and devastating. The disease, rare and aggressive, began to steal the light of his eyes, but never the brilliance of his spirit. Arthur, the man who could move markets with a single call, was powerless. He mobilized the best doctors in the world, built an entire hospital wing dedicated to the research, dumped an incalculable fortune in the search for a cure. But the money could not buy time. This is where Arthur's pain began to turn into bitterness. Each day at the hospital was torture. He saw his wife, the anchor of his life, slowly disappear before his eyes. He sank at work, using it as a drug to anesthetize suffering. He spent hours on conferences at the hospital corridor, closing multi-billionaire businesses while, a few meters away, the love of his life waged a battle he could not win. He believed he was being strong, that he was keeping their world intact. But in reality, he was absent. He was building a wall between him and the pain, and without realizing it, was leaving Helena alone on the other side. Helena's hidden life began these days. While Arthur was immersed in his empire, Helena found comfort in an unlikely friendship. In the next room was Sophia, Leah's mother, a woman from a completely different world, facing her own silent battle, but with a serenity that Helena found magnetic. They did not talk about business or about high society. They talked about life, daughters, fears, and hopes. Sophia spoke of Leah, her struggling daughter, with immense pride. Helena spoke of Arthur, her impatient angel, with a deep love, but also with a growing concern. She saw the man she loved closing to the world, becoming a hard shell to protect herself from imminent pain. The exchange of the necklace, the act that would trigger all this story years later, was not an impulsive gesture. It was Helena's last move. On a quiet afternoon, when both knew that time was short, Helena took the necklace. "Sophia," she said with a weak but firm voice, "I want you to stay with this. Arthur gave me. It's the most precious thing I have." Sophia protested, saying that she could not accept something of so much value. "The value is not in gold, but in the promise," insisted Helena. "I see how my Arthur is getting lost. When I go, he will close completely. He will become a king in an ice castle. I want you to promise that somehow you will look for him. You don't have to do anything, just know that he is not the man he will become." Sophia, with tears in her eyes, accepted the necklace and the promise. Shortly thereafter, Helena is gone. Arthur's pain was a black hole that consumed everything. He became exactly what Helena feared, a king in an ice castle. arrogance, impatience, coldness. All of this was an armor forged in the fire of loss. He shouted with waiters, humiliated staff, and pushed anyone away to approach. Every act of cruelty was a silent cry of his own pain. He became a billionaire in wealth, but an indigent of soul. The disappearance of the necklace was barely noticed amid his mourning. It was just another thing that life had stolen to him. Years passed. The pain did not decrease, only fossilized, becoming part of who he was. He forgot the man who went with Helena, the man she loved. He became the caricature that the world saw, the relentless billionaire, until that night in the restaurant. Seeing the necklace on Leah's neck, a crack opened in her ice armor. It was not just the recognition of the jewelry, it was an echo of the Mediterranean sun, Helena's smile, of a life that he had buried under layers of bitterness and wealth. That glimpse of his painful past was the catalyst. The anger he felt to see the necklace was the reaction of a man whose deepest wound had been touched, and the confusion that followed was the beginning of the defrost. For the first time in years, Arthur Blackwood was not in control. He was at the mercy of a secret, a mystery that would force him to confront his wife's ghost, and most importantly, the ghost of the man he became. For the first time in years, Arthur Blackwood was not in control. He was at the mercy of a secret, a mystery that would force him to confront his wife's ghost, and most importantly, the ghost of the man he became. Let's go back to that exact moment in the restaurant. Time seemed to freeze. A second before, the hall was the scene of a demonstration of power, a billionaire exercising your privilege about an anonymous waitress. Arthur's voice, accustomed to running meeting rooms and knocking over competitors, cut the air with cruel accuracy. Leah, the target, was a portrait of pure vulnerability, shrunk under the weight of public humiliation. The other clients, the city's elite, diverted their eyes, uncomfortable, but accomplices in their silence. It was an ugly but familiar spectacle, the strong crushing the weak. But then the script changed without warning. Arthur's change of attitude was not gradual. It was a cataclysm. His fury, which was an erupted volcano, simply got extinct. The flow of poisonous words ceased in the middle of a sentence. His shoulders, once tense and imposing, fell slightly. The red face of anger lost his color, becoming a pale mask of unbelief. Her eyes, who previously shot Leah with contempt, were now wide, fixed in a single point, the delicate silver necklace that rested on her collarbone. For the observers, the scene was incomprehensible. What they saw was a predator stopping in the middle of the attack, completely mesmerized by something they couldn't understand. The silence that followed was deafening. The distant tilint of a falling fork seemed a thunder. The restaurant's collective breathing was suspended. All eyes, who once tried to avoid the scene, were now spiked in Arthur and Leah, trying to decipher that silent drama. Power had changed hands in an invisible and inexplicable way. Leah, who a moment ago was the defenseless victim, was now unknowingly the holder of immense power over the most powerful man in the room. Leah felt the change before understanding her. Verbal bombing stopped, and silence made her even more exposed. She looked up slowly, waiting for another wave of insults, but found a look that was not anger. It was a lost look, confused, almost haunted. She followed the direction of his gaze and saw him fixed on his necklace. Instinctively, his hand went up to touch the jewel, a protective gesture. That necklace was his sanctuary, the only tangible connection with the mother she barely known. The idea that this man, his tormentor, was looking at him so intensely filled her with a new kind of fear. It was no longer the fear of being fired or humiliated. It was a deeper fear, the fear that he wanted to get from her the only thing that really mattered. Arthur, in turn, was elsewhere. The restaurant, the customers, the waitress, everything was disappeared. In his mind, he was back on a sunny day on the Italian coast, with the sound of waves in the background and the smell of lemon men in the air. He saw himself, younger and happier, putting that same necklace in Helena's neck. He remembered her laughter, the brightness in his eyes, the silent promise that jewelry represented. Seeing that sacred symbol of his happier past in such a profane context, in the neck of a strange that he was humiliating, was a short circuit in his soul. The cognitive dissonance was so strong that it paralyzed it. As the question echoed in his mind, drowning all other thoughts, like that peace which should be lost forever, was there? The tension was palpable, a thick energy that everyone could feel. The restaurant manager, a man used to dealing with the whims of the rich and famous, began to move cautiously towards the table, not knowing whether he should intervene or escape. Arthur's friends, who once smiled at his power demonstration, now exchanged nervous glances. They had known Arthur for years, but they had never seen it that way. That was not anger. It was something much deeper, something that bordered the pain. Finally, Arthur broke the silence. But the voice that came out was not that of the tycoon. It was the voice of a lost man. "Where?" he started, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "Where did you get this necklace?" The question, asked with such vulnerability, shocked everyone even more than their previous screams. Leah, get surprised by Tom's change, stammered the truth. "It was a gift from my mother." The answer, instead of clarifying, only deepened the abyss in Arthur's mind. Her mother. The phrase made no sense. There was no possible connection, unless there was a secret, a hidden life he was unaware of. The possibility, however remote, was the only logical explanation at a time that challenged all logic. That was the turning point. The need to humiliate was replaced by a much more powerful need, the need to know. Shocking truth was there, hanging around that young man's neck, and he, Arthur Blackwood, the man who had answers to everything, was completely in the dark. He couldn't stay there anymore. The luxurious atmosphere of the restaurant suddenly looked suffocating. He stood up abruptly, the chair dragging harshly on the polished floor. He looked at Leah a last time, not angry, but with an intensity that made her shudder, a mixture of despair and determination. Without another word, he turned and marched out of the restaurant, leaving behind an unpaid account, a room full of astonished people and a young waitress holding her necklace as the only stable thing in a world that had just turned upside down. The tension in the restaurant had not dissipated. She only followed him to the night, becoming a public drama into a particular and obsessive mystery. Arthur's reaction was extreme, from anger to obsession in seconds. What do you think he was thinking at that very moment? If you were the waitress and saw this reaction, what would go through your head? Comment below. If I were the waiteress, I will think, and complete the sentence with your thoughts. The tension in the restaurant had not dissipated. She only followed him to the night, becoming a public drama into a particular and obsessive mystery. The moment the glass doors of the Grand Oak closed behind Arthur Blackwood, the relentless billionaire persona began to crack, giving way to something he had not felt for years. An overwhelming mixture of doubt and a dangerous spark of hope. He got into his car, the interior of leather and polished wood that usually brought a feeling of order and control. Now it looked like a cage. He didn't start. It just stayed there, in the silence of the luxury vehicle, while chaos spinned in his mind. The necklace, the image was recorded on its retina. It was not a replica, he was sure. The way the light focused on the small pendant, the artisanal design of the current. It was Helena's necklace. But how? Leah's answer, "It was from my mother," echoed in her head, a dissonance that her logical mind could not soothe. The doubt was a poison. Would it have been stolen? The idea was repulsive. It would mean that his wife's memory had been desecrated. He imagined the necklace being sold, running from hand to that waitress. The anger went back to bubble, but it was different now. It was not the arrogant fury of before, but a protective anger, the fury of a man whose most sacred sanctuary had been invaded. If that were the case, he would move heavens and land to recover what was his own, to punish those responsible. He would use the full weight of his fortune and influence to crush anyone behind it. But then, the other possibility, the most faint and terrifying, has insinuated in his thoughts. Hope. What if it wasn't for a theft? What if there was a connection? A story he didn't know? The mention of the waitress's mother opened a door to a maze of speculation. Could Helena have met this woman? Could she have given the necklace? The idea seemed absurd. Helena would never give that jewel. It was the symbol of their love. Unless the circumstances were so extraordinary, so desperate, that an unthinkable act became the only option. This line of thought took him back to the dark days in the hospital, a period of his life that he had sealed hermetically in his memory. What really happened in those sterile rooms while he was busy building his empire? The doubt was agonizing, but the hope of discovering a new fragment of Helena, a secret she kept, was an even more powerful force. It was this force that boosted him to action. The beginning of the investigation was not a decision, it was a reflection. Arthur took his smartphone, a device he used to command an army of executives, and dialed a number that was not on his regular contact list. It was Mark's number, his security boss. Mark was not an ordinary bodyguard. He was a ghost, a man with a past in intelligence agencies, whose loyalty to Arthur was absolute and whose methods were effective. "Mark," said Arthur, the voice firm, but loaded with an urgency that made Mark, on the other side of the line, sit erect. "I have a job for you, guys. Top priority." Arthur described the scene in the restaurant, the waitress, the necklace. "Her name is Leah. Works on the Grand Oak. I want everything about her. Birth records, family history, where she lives, if she has antecedents. But the main focus, Mark, is her mother. I want to know who she was, where she came from, and how, in the name of God, she got that necklace. Do not save expenses. I want a preliminary report on my table." Hit the phone. Arthur felt a wave of family power. The investigation had begun. He was back to his element, in control, moving the pieces in a board. However, this time, the game was different. This was not money or power. It was a matter of unraveling the swing truth of his own past. While the sophisticated research machine of a billionaire entered in action, Leah's life followed her course alien to all this. After the incident, she was called to the manager's office. Hoping to be fired, she was surprised to receive only a confusing warning and a request to not irritate customers like Mr. Blackwood again. The manager was more intimidated by Arthur's reaction than annoyed by Leah's error. She returned to work, her body moving on autopilot, but her mind on whirlwind. At the end of her turn, she exhausted. She took the bus home. The route took her away from the brightness and glamour of the city center to the reality of her neighborhood. His apartment was small, the rent always a concern. Leah's life was a web of responsibilities that held her. She was not just a waitress. She was her sick grandmother's only caregiver, whose fragile health required expensive medicines and constant attention. His dreams of attending college, of having a career, had been placed on waiting indefinitely. When she got home, she found her grandmother sleeping a busy sleep. Leah prepared a tea and sat in the small kitchen, the silence of the night amplifying her concerns. The meeting with Arthur Blackwood had shaken her deeply. The initial humiliation was painful, but his strange fixation in his necklace was what really disturbed her. She took the necklace and held him in the palm of her hand. It was so delicate, almost insignificant in terms of material value. But for her, it was everything. It was the last trace of her mother, a woman she only knew through her grandmother's fragmented stories. A mother who, according to the stories, was kind, dreamy, and who had received that necklace from a special friend in a moment of great difficulty. Doubt and hope also began to sprout in Leah's mind, though in a very different way from Arthur's. Doubt, could that powerful man try to get her necklace? The idea terrified her. Hope, could his reaction be the key to understanding more about his mother's past? Could the special friend be someone in that man's world? The possibility was so remote that it seemed fantasy, an unlikely fairy tale. But that night, holding the necklace, Leah felt for the first time that jewelry was not just a memory, but perhaps a mystery waiting to be resolved. A door for a hidden life she never knew her mother had. Two worlds, so distant, were now linked by a single object. On the one hand, a billionaire using his vast wealth to dig a secret. On the other, one waitress struggling to survive, holding the key to this secret unknowingly. Arthur's investigation would not only reveal the truth about the necklace, he was destined to collide with Leah's life in a way that neither could predict, forcing them to confront the hidden truths of their own families. The investigation is underway, and both sides of history are developing. Which side are you more curious to know what happens next? Comment Team Arthur if you are more invested in searching for the billionaire, or comment Team Leah if you are more connected with the waitress journey. Let's see to whom the crowd is bigger. Two worlds, so distant, were now linked by a single object. On the one hand, a billionaire using his vast wealth to dig a secret. On the other, one waitress struggling to survive, holding the key to this secret unknowingly. Arthur's investigation would not only reveal the truth about the necklace, he was destined to collide with Leah's life in a way that neither could predict, forcing them to confront the hidden truths of their own families. But for a moment, we will move away from skyscrapers and luxury offices where Arthur's search is being orchestrated. Let's leave the world of Billionaire behind and actually enter Leah's life. Because to understand the real weight of that necklace, to feel the impact of the turf swing that is coming, you need to walk her shoes. You need to see the world through the eyes of a young woman for whom survival is not a strategy game, but a daily battle. Leah's life did not have the luxury of reflection. While Arthur could stop his world to decipher a mystery, Leah's world stopped no one. The night after the meeting with Arthur was not spent anxious speculation, but in an exhaustive routine that was both his prison and his salvation. Arriving home, the silence of the small apartment was broken only by the weak cough from the back room. There, in a bed spent for time, he rested his grandmother, the only family left. Leah's grandmother was the center of her universe. A woman who one day had been strong and vibrant, now was a fragile figure, trapped by a chronic disease that slowly consumed her strength, and even faster, Leah's little economies. Each extra shift in the restaurant, each tipped tip was immediately converted into medicines of medicines, medical accounts, and special foods. The difficult waitress's life was not a lifestyle choice. It was a relentless need. That night, as in all the others, Leah began her second round. She checked her grandmother's medication, prepared a light soup, and sat next to the bed, reading in a low voice an old romance to calm her. While reading the words of distant worlds, his mind wandered. The man's face in the restaurant, the transition from fury to shock, the intensity of his gaze on the necklace. That meeting had left a mark. It was not just humiliation, it was the mystery. For the first time, the necklace she wore every day seemed more than a simple inheritance. It looked like a puzzle. "He looked at the necklace, Grandma," Leah whispered in the silence of the room after her grandmother fell asleep. "As if you know him." She held the pendant, the cold metal against her hot skin. The story she always knew was that her mother, Sophia, had received him from a rich and kind friend she had met at the hospital. A good soul with a sad smile. But the details were foggy, like a faded photograph. Who was this woman? Why would she give such a personal gift to her mother, a complete stranger from another world? Hidden Life of Her Mother was a closed book that Leah never had a chance to read. Leah's routine was a crushing cycle. Waking up before the sun is born to prepare the grandmother's meals and medicines, run to the restaurant to face long hours standing, forced smiles, and occasionally the arrogance of customers like Arthur. Back home, exhausted, just to start your caregiver journey. Her own dreams, like the pages of a college book she kept at her bedside table, were covered with dust. She dreamed of being a graphic designer, creating beauty with colors and shapes. But the reality of his life was in black and white, a constant equation of expenses versus revenues. The day after the incident, work at the restaurant was tense. The co-workers looked at her with a mixture of penalty and curiosity. The story of the confrontation with the famous billionaire Arthur Blackwood had spread like fire. "What did he want with you?" asked one colleague. "Why did he get out that way?" I read, just shaking my head, with no answers to give. She was marked, as if the meeting had separated her from the rest of the normal world. During a break, she sat at the back of the restaurant, looking at the alley. She took off the necklace and watched it under the weak light. It was really beautiful. Delicate, but strong, just like her mother, she imagined, and just as she herself tried to be. That necklace was not a symbol of wealth for her. It was a symbol of resilience. It was proof that even at the darker moments, like the last days of his mother in a hospital, friendship and kindness could flourish. It was the inheritance not of money, but of character. And the idea that someone, especially such a powerful and cruel man as Arthur, could have some claim about him, filled her with a protective fury. This connection to Leah is crucial. We do not see it just as a helpless victim, we see it as a silent warrior. Every plate she carries, every smile she forces, every medicine she buys is an act of love and sacrifice. It is not defined by its poverty, but by its richness of mind. It is the embodiment of dignity in the midst of adversity. And the necklace is the maximum symbol of it. It is not a jewel, it is the medal of honor of your family. In the meantime, without her knowing, Arthur's investigation advanced at a dizzying speed. Reports were being compiled, hospital records were being accessed, and Sophia's life, Leah's mother, was being meticulously rebuilt by strangers. The world of Leah, so small and contained, was about to be invaded by the overwhelming force of wealth and power. The collision was inevitable. In creating this deep empathy for Waitress, understanding the holiness of that necklace in your life, we have prepared the public for the true impact of revelation. When the truth comes to light, it will not only be the solution of a mystery to a billionaire, it will be a seismic event in the life of a young woman who already carries the weight of the world on her shoulders. The story is not about a rich man discovering a secret. It is about how this secret has the power to redeem a man and at the same time transform the life of the silent heroine of this story forever. Leah's life is a constant struggle, and the necklace is his most sacred good. Now that you know her story, how would you feel if you were in your place? If a powerful billionaire suddenly appeared, obsessed with your mother's only inheritance, what would you do? Comment below. If I were Leah, I would protect the necklace at all costs, or if I were Elia, I would want to know the truth. What would be your priority? The story is not about a rich man discovering a secret, it is about how this secret has the power to redeem a man, and at the same time transform the life of the silent heroine of this story forever. And this transformation begins not with a crash, but with the soft sound of an envelope being placed on a mahogany table. While Leah lived her routine of sacrifice and resilience, Arthur Blackwood's world operated at a completely different frequency. At night, to him was not sleepy, but an anxious waking. He walked from side to side on his roof, a lion caged overlooking a city that looked small and insignificant. The image of the necklace and the scared face of the waitress surpassed her mind, creating a torment that even her most expensive whiskey could silence. For the first time in a long time, Billionaire was not thinking about acquisitions or the stock market. He was obsessed with a ghost. The sun had barely begun to paint the sky of grey when Mark, his assistant, arrived. Mark was not the kind of assistant who had coffee. He was a man of few words, with eyes that saw everything and an efficiency that bordered the supernatural. He moved with the stillness of a predator and carried a brown envelope, thick and heavy with the weight of secrets. He placed him on Arthur's table without saying a word. That envelope was the first piece of the puzzle. Arthur tore the seal with an urgency that betrayed his self-control facade. His hands, which signed 9-digit checks without trembling, were now slightly unstable. What would he find inside? Confirmation of a nasty theft or the door to an even deeper mystery? The report started with what he already knew. Leah, 24, a waitress on the Grand Oak. No police passage, no suspected debt. Only the record of a difficult life, working on low, paying jobs since adolescence to support itself and a sick grandmother. Each line of the report painted a picture of struggle and integrity, a stark contrast to the image he had formed from her the night before. A twinge of shame hit him again, but he pushed her to the side, hungry for the information that really mattered. He turned the page and arrived at the section entitled Sophia Reyes, Leah's mother. And that's when Arthur's heart began to accelerate. The date and place of Sophia's death jumped from the page as if they were on fire. St. Jude Hospital, the same week Helena had died, on the same walk. The coincidence was so unlikely that it could not be a coincidence. It was fate or something like mocking him. Mark, anticipating the need of his boss, had gone beyond. Using methods that Arthur would rather not question, he got access to records that should be sealed forever. There was a hospital admissions list, and the names of Helena Blackwood and Sophia Reyes were just a few lines away from each other. Not only were they in the same hospital at the same time, they were neighboring neighbors. For weeks, Arthur's mind, trained to find patterns and connections in complex financial data, now worked frantically to process this new and shocking variable. Helena and the waitress mother. Did you share a room? He remembered his visits to the hospital. He remembered a private room, but perhaps at the beginning, when the wing he funded was not ready yet. Yes, he vaguely remembered from Helena mentioning a roommate in the early days, but he barely paid attention, immersed in his own concerns and business connections in the corridor. He had discarded the information as trivial, a mistake, a colossal error. The real bomb, however, was yet to come. At the bottom of the envelope, there was a photograph, a copy of an old and wrinkled photo that Mark's team had located in the belongings of Leah's grandmother. The quality was bad, the colors faded over time, but the content was explosive. The photo showed two women sitting on a garden bench, laughing. One of them was undoubtedly Sophia, the woman whose records he had just read, and the other was Helena. Arthur dropped the report. He took the picture, holding her like a sacred artifact. It was her. Helena's smile, a genuine smile he hadn't seen for so long, was there, captured on that piece of paper. She was thinner. Her face showed the signs of disease, but the light in her eyes was unmistakable. And she was with Sophia. They were not just room neighbors, they were friends. The way they were sitting, the proximity, the joy shared at the moment. Everything spoke of a real and deep connection. Shocking truth hit him with the strength of a train. The hidden life he feared and expected to find. It was not a fantasy, it was real. While he was in the corridor, building his empire and drowning in his own pain, his wife was forging one of the most important friendships of his life. A friendship on which he knew absolutely nothing. He, her husband, the protector, the center of her universe, or so he thought, had been a stranger to the final chapter of her story. The assistant's discovery was not just a piece of the puzzle, it was the cornerstone. She recontextualized everything. The necklace had not been stolen. The waitress was not an opportunist. She was the legacy of her wife's secret friendship. The humiliation of the night before now seemed a sacrilege. He had not just shouted with a waitress. He had desecrated Helena's memory in a way that he could barely understand. The anger he felt turned into a wave of shame so intense that he left him breathless. And under shame, a new emotion began to emerge, a desperate need for redemption. He needed to fix that, not just for the waitress, but by Helena. He owed it to her. He looked at Leah's address in the report. It was no longer just a data on a page. It was a destination. He needed to go there. I needed to talk to her. But what would he say? Sorry for being a monster, by the way. My late wife and her late mother were best friends in secret. The situation was so surreal, so loaded with pain and secrets that there was no script to follow. For the first time, the great Arthur Blackwood, the manipulator master, had no plan. He had only a faded photo, a heavy heart of regret, and the address of a young woman who unknowingly keeping the key to the peace of her soul. The investigation had given him the first answer, but this answer only generated 100 new questions, and he knew there was only one person in the world who could help him answer them. The first piece of the puzzle was revealed, and is more shocking than Arthur imagined. He now knows that there is a deep and secret connection. If you were in Arthur's place, what would be your next immediate step? Would you go directly to Leah's house, or would you try to find out more before confronting it with this truth? Comment. Go to her house now, or investigate more first. What strategy would you choose? For the first time, the great Arthur Blackwood, the manipulator master, had no plan. He had only a faded photo, a heavy heart of regret, and the address of a young woman who unknowingly keeping the key to the peace of her soul. The investigation had given him the first answer, but this answer only generated 100 new questions, and he knew there was only one person in the world who could help him answer them. The decision to go to Leah's address was not a strategic choice. It was a visceral impulse. The need to understand, to connect with that lost fragment of Helena's life, has surpassed any hesitation. He didn't change his clothes, didn't call his driver. He himself took the keys from one of his less flashy cars, though less flashy in the world of a billionaire still meant a vehicle that was worth more than the entire building where he was going. The trip through the city was a pilgrimage. Every kilometer that drifted him from his financial district and approached him to the Leah Operario neighborhood was one step out of his comfort zone. The skyscrapers that reflected their power gave way to brick buildings and neighborhood stores. It was a world he saw from his coverage, but he had never stepped on. When parking on modest street, attracting curious looks, he felt the weight of being a stranger. The power and influence that were his armor in his own territory here made him only a target, an intruder. He climbed the stairs of the simple building, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing in the silent corridor. Each step was heavy with uncertainty. What did he expect to achieve? Her apology seemed so inappropriate, so small in the face of the enormity of what he had discovered. He stopped in front of the door of Leah's apartment, his hand up to knock, but hesitated. The man who never hesitated to close a $1 billion business was now paralyzed at a simple wooden door. The photo in his coat pocket seemed to burn, a reminder of what was at stake. He took a deep breath and hit. When the door opened, Leah's face went by surprise to alarm in the blink of an eye. Seeing him there on his door was a nightmare to come true. His protective instinct assumed control. His grandmother was inside, fragile and sick. She could not leave that man, the embodiment of the cruelty of the night before, disturbing the peace of his home. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice shaking a little, but with a steel edge that Arthur didn't expect. She positioned herself at the entrance, a human barrier between him and his family. Her view, so fiercely protective of her small world, only deepened Arthur's shame. He raised his hands, a universal gesture of surrender. "Please," he said, and the word, so rarely used by him, came out with raw sincerity. "I didn't come to cause problems. I swear. I need to talk to you. It's about the necklace, and it's about your mother." Your mother's mention was the key. Leah's armor cracked. Curiosity mixed with deep apprehension surpassed his fear. How could this man know anything about his mother? She looked over her shoulder into the silent interior of her apartment and made a decision. With a visible reluctance, she walked away, allowing him to enter. The apartment was exactly as the reports described: small, humble, but impeccably clean. There was a dignity in the simplicity that violently contrasted with the empty opulence of Arthur's life. He felt great and clumsy in that space, a bull in a porcelain store. His eyes were attracted to a small collection of photos on a shelf, and there she was, the same photo of the report, but this time the original. Sophia, her mother, smiling at the camera. "I want to apologize," Arthur started, the lowest voice than usual. "For my behavior last night. There is no justification. I was wrong, and I'm sorry for the way I treated it." Leah crossed her arms, still defensive. "Sorry do not pay the bills, Mr. Blackwood. What do you really want?" It was the time of truth, the turning point. Arthur stuck his hand in his pocket and took the copy of the photo Mark had found. Helena and Sophia's photo together. He extended her to Leah. "This woman," he said, his embargoed voice pointing to the smiling figure next to Sophia. "This was my wife, Helena." Leah took the photo. She looked at the image, then to Arthur, and back to the image. The confusion on his face was total. She recognized the woman. It was the special friend of his grandmother's stories, the woman of the sad smile. But was she the wife's wife? The man who humiliated her? The connection seemed impossible, a cruel joke of fate. I don't understand," she stammered. "They were in the same hospital," explained Arthur, each word weighing a ton. "At the same time. They shared a room. I didn't know. I swear on everything that's holy, I didn't know they were friends." The confession of his own ignorance, his own absence, was the most vulnerable thing he has already admitted aloud. It was at this very moment that history took a direction that even Arthur's investigation could not have predicted. The back bedroom door opened, and Leah's grandmother, backed by her cane, slowly entered the room, attracted to the voices. His elderly eyes, inhibited by the cataract, examined the stranger tall in his living room. And then they settled in a detail. Not on Arthur's face, but in the small lapel brooch in his suit, a Helena gift he wore every day as a silent penance. "The angel," the old lady whispered, the fragile voice like a dry leaf. Arthur and Leah turned, surprised. "Helena?" "She always talked about her impatient angel," her grandmother continued, her eyes now fixed on Arthur's face, memory turning on like an old lamp. "She told Sophia. He said he carried the world on his back, but under all that armor, he had the heart of an angel." The revelation hit Arthur with the strength of a wave. Helena talked about him. To Leah's mother, his wife's hidden life was not just about a friendship, it was about him. About the love she felt for him, a love she shared with her new friend. Shocking truth was that even in her last days, the center of Helena's universe was still him, but in a way he had never understood. The connection was finally revealed, not by an investigator report, but by the living memory of a fragile lady. It was no longer a theory. It was an undeniable and moving truth. The arrogant billionaire, the battler waitress, and the sick grandmother were now united by a shared secret, a bonded bond in the friendship of two women who had found comforting each other on the brink of death. The turning point was not just the discovery of the connection. It was the understanding that this connection was woven with love, loss, and a silent promise that was about to be fully revealed. The truth is beginning to surface in a completely unexpected way. Leah's grandmother is the key to unraveling the entire mystery. If you were in the room at that moment as Leah, what would you feel when hearing your grandmother's words? Comment, "As Leah I would feel," and complete with your emotion. Shocked, thrilled, confused. Let's see which feeling prevails. The turning point was not just the discovery of the cone Zhao. It was the understanding that this connection was woven with love, loss, and a silent promise that was about to be fully revealed. Leah's grandmother's words hovered in the air, filling the small apartment with the weight of years of secrets. The impatient angel. The description was so accurate, so closely Helena, that it hit Arthur with a physical force. He was no longer the billionaire Arthur Blackwood. He was just Helena's impatient angel, exposed and vulnerable in front of strangers who knew more about his wife's heart than himself. Leah was paralyzed, looking from her grandmother to the man who, even moments ago, was his tormentor. That man, whose cruelty had made her cry, was the angel of her mother's stories. Reality seemed to bend over itself. The world she knew, a world of struggle and simplicity, was merging with that man's universe of wealth and power in a way she could never have imagined. Hidden life of her mother was not just about a friendship. It was about an epic love, seen by the eyes of a privileged spectator. Arthur, surpassing the initial shock, took a step toward Leah's grandmother. In a gesture that shocked himself as much as Leah, he knelt. The man who commanded empires, before whom presidents and princes bend, was on his knees on the ground, spent a modest apartment before a fragile lady. It was not an act of theatre. It was an act of pure and desperate supplication. His eyes, which so often exhibited coldness and calculation, were now teary with the tears he repressed for years. "Please," he whispered, his broken voice stripped of all his authority. Tell me everything." The grandmother, with the lucidity that vivid memories sometimes bring to the elderly, looked at Arthur with a compassion that completely disarmed him. She sat on her armchair spent, and Red, feeling the solemnity of the moment, sat on the floor beside her, holding her hand. The emotional climax of the story was about to unfold, not in a meeting room or in a court, but in the humble living room of a waitress. "Helena and Sophia," began her grandmother, her voice gaining strength with the importance of her narrative. "They were like the sun and the moon in that place of shadows. The hospital was a sad place, but when they were together, there was light. Sophia, my daughter, was always a kind soul, but the disease was consuming. And Helena was a force of nature. Even sick, she had a flame that never went out, but it was a lonely flame." She looked at Arthur. "She loved you more than life itself. She spoke of you all the time, from her impulse, your genius, and her pain. She saw how you were walking away, closing in a work castle, and anger not to have to face the truth that she was losing. She didn't blame him, but it broke her heart. Each word was a knife in Arthur's chest. He remembered the long hours on the phone, the closed businesses in the corridors, believing he was being strong for her. But now he saw the truth. He was abandoning her at his time of greater emotional need. "Sophia became her confidant," the grandmother continued. "They shared everything, their deeper fears, their happiest memories. And it was in one of those afternoons when the sun was setting and painting the orange room, which Helena told her the story of the necklace." Leah squeezed her grandmother's hand, her eyes fixed on her, absorbing each word. "Helena told Sophia about the trip to Italy, about how you both found the necklace in a little shop, about how he was a symbol not of wealth, but of perfect love. She said it was the most precious thing she had because she contained the memory of the happiest day of her life. And then she did something that shocked my daughter." The grandmother paused, gathering strength. Helena took the neck around her neck. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were determined. She extended to Sophia. "I want you to stay with it," she said. Sophia refused, of course. It was a treasure. "It's not a gift, Sophia," Helena insisted. "It's a promise." This was the heart of mystery, the history of the necklace. "Helena explained," said her grandmother, looking straight at Arthur, as if she was conveying Helena's message over time. "When I go, my impatient angel will get lost. He will build such high walls around his heart that no one will ever be able to reach him. He will become a king in an ice castle, rich in everything except happiness. I can't let it happen." She said to Sophia that the necklace was a reminder. Fate crossed her ways. She would use the necklace to remind him. The final, shocking truth, the purpose of the necklace, was revealed. It wasn't just a souvenir friendship, it was a mission. Helena's posthumous mission to save her husband's soul. Leah began to cry quietly, the tears running down her face. The necklace she wore wasn't just an inheritance. It was a burden, a sacred responsibility she carried unknowingly. Arthur could no longer contain the emotion. Open and raw hiccups shook his body. Billionaire's armor completely disintegrated, revealing the broken man underneath. All his arrogance, his anger, his bitterness. Everything was a betrayal of Helena's last will. He had not only become the king in the ice castle, he had deleted this, and the night before he had spit in his own salvation. But Sophia was sick too, story teen Arthur, trying to understand the rest. "Yes," said her grandmother with a deep sadness. "Life can be very cruel. Sophia never had a chance to fulfill her promise, but in her deathbed she spent her promise. She gave me the paste and made me swim that I would give him Leah when she was old enough. She said, maybe one day the destination completes the circle, and Leah, my daughter, will be the guardian of Helena's promise. That even in darkness, friendship and love can create a light that lasts forever." The emotional climax has reached its apex. The necklace was a torch, passed from the hand of a loving wife to a loyal friend, and a dying mother to her innocent daughter. It was a will of love, friendship, and hope, an unbreakable chain that connected 3 women and a man through time and tragedy. Arthur raised his head, his face bathed in tears. He looked at Leah, no longer like a waitress, but as the guardian of his wife's legacy, the messenger he had despised. The irony was overwhelming. The person he humbled the most was the only person in the world who could offer him the redemption he so desperately needed, but never knew he sought. The full story of the necklace was revealed and is more powerful and moving than anyone could imagine. It is a moment of catharsis and pain for everyone in the room. If you were in Arthur's place, listening to this story, what would be the first thing you would say to Leah after such a devastating revelation? Comment below. If I were Arthur, my first words to Leah would be, and complete the sentence. The irony was overwhelming. The person he humbled the most was the only person in the world who could offer him the redemption he so desperately needed, but never knew he sought. The silence that followed in the small living room was not empty, but filled by such a heavy and deep truth that it seemed to have a physical presence. The tears of Arthur, Leah, and even grandmother told the story of 2 decades of pain, loss, and secrets finally brought to light. The ice castle around the heart of Billionaire had not just cracked, he had shattered, and the shards of ice melted on the floor of that humble apartment. Arthur, still on his knees, finally looked up at Leah. His eyes no longer contained the arrogance of a tycoon or the confusion of a haunted man. They contained painful clarity, a vulnerability he had never shown to another human being since Helena's death. He saw Leah, not as the waitress, not as a pawn in his mystery, but as the embodiment of his wife's last will. She was the guardian of the promise. "Forgiveness," he whispered, and the word this time carried the weight of all his repentance. It was not a superficial apology for the rudeness in the restaurant. It was a request for forgiveness for years of bitterness, for becoming the man Helena feared, for betraying her memory when closing to the world. And above all, it was a request for forgiveness for desecrating the sacred symbol that Leah carried, without understanding his true meaning. Leah, her face still wet with tears, looked at that undone man. The anger he felt for him, the fear, had all dissolved, replaced by a wave of overwhelming empathy. She didn't see the monster who humiliated her anymore. She saw the impatient angel of whom her mother had heard, a man who loved so deeply that the loss broke him. She saw the pain that mirrored her own loss. In a gesture that surprised herself, she reached out and touched his shoulder. A simple touch, but it crossed the abyss between its worlds. "I didn't know," Leah said, the soft voice. "For me, it was just the only thing I had from my mother. I didn't know I carried someone else's heart along with hers." The resolution of that moment did not come with great speeches or empty promises. It came with the silent acceptance of that shared truth. Arthur, with Leah's help, got up slowly. He was no longer the intimidating giant. It seemed smaller, more human. He looked around the small apartment, seeing no poverty, but the richness of love and care that filled him, a wealth that his vast fortune could not buy. He looked at Leah's grandmother, who gave her a tired but understanding nod. "Helena was right," said Arthur, more to himself than to others. "I got lost. For years. I honored her memory by building an empire in her name, but forgot to honor her spirit, which was made of kindness and connection." Arthur's redemption would not be a unique event, but a process, and he knew he needed to start there at that moment. He turned to Leah, and for the first time he truly saw her. A bright, strong young woman whose dreams were being suffocated by the weight of circumstances. The same circumstances that, in a distorted way, were created by the promise that linked it to him. "Helena's promise," began Arthur, the firmer voice now, with a new purpose. "It was for your mother to take care of me, but she couldn't. And your mother, in turn, has gone this promise to you, in the form of this necklace. You, Reed, take care of the memory of Helena and her mother every day, with her strength and dignity, without even knowing. Now, it's my turn to honor the promise." Leah looked at him confused. Helena wanted someone to take care of me, but what she really would have wanted, what Sophia would have wanted, was that someone took care of you, he explained. "I can't erase what I did, humiliation, pain, but I can try to build something new from these ashes. I want to help, not as charity," he rushed to say, seeing hesitation on Leah's face. "Not like a billionaire paying for his fault, but as a way of honoring the friendship of those two women, as a way to finally fulfill Helena's promise." He talked about Leah's dreams, about the design college that Mark's reports had mentioned. He talked about his grandmother's care, offering access to the best doctors, not as a demonstration of wealth, but as a genuine gesture. "Let me do that," he begged. "Let me be part of the circle your mother and Helena started. Let me help take care of you, just as they took care of each other." For Leah, the offer was overwhelming. His entire life has been defined by self, sufficiency, never depending on anyone. Accepting the help of that man seemed a betrayal of everything she represented. But then she looked at the necklace around her neck. The history of the necklace was not about independence, it was about interdependence, about how people support themselves, take care of themselves, make promises for each other. Refusing his help would be to break the spirit of that promise. With a slow, weighted nod, Leah accepted. It was not a surrender, but a partnership, a new beginning. The weeks and months that followed saw a silent transformation. Arthur not only paid for the Leah College, he became his mentor, genuinely interested in his talent. Not only did he get the best care for her grandmother, he visited them, not as a patron, but as a family friend, listening to his grandmother's stories about Sophia and Helena, filling the gaps in her own past. The resolution was not an end of fairy tale where the waitress marries the billionaire. It was much more real and deep. It was the creation of a new family, forged from pain and loss, united by a bond of friendship that transcended death. Arthur, the king of the ice castle, learned to feel again. He began to smile, connecting with people, using his immense wealth not only to accumulate more power, but to create a positive impact, a legacy that Helena would have been proud. Leah, free from the financial burden, flourished. Her talent for design exploded, but she never lost the humility and strength that defined her. She and Arthur built a unique friendship, based on mutual respect and a shared secret. The final scene of this story is not in a luxury restaurant or a meeting room. It is in an art gallery, months later at Lear's first exhibition. Arthur is there, standing at the bottom of the room, watching with a silent pride while reading, confident and happy, explains his work. She still uses the necklace. It is no longer a burden or a mystery. It is a symbol that the most unexpected connections can be born of pain, that redemption is possible, and that love and friendship, like the history of that paste, never really die. They just find a new beginning. The journey came to an end, with redemption and a new beginning for everyone. Was it a satisfactory resolution for you? What has this story taught you about forgiveness, second chances, and the unexpected connections of life? Comment below. This story taught me that. And share your greatest lesson. They just find a new beginning. The story of Arthur and Lear, connected by love and Pell. The friendship of Helena and Sophia shows us that behind each face, whether of a powerful billionaire or a battle waitress, there is a story hoping to be told. It shows that it is never too late for redemption, and that the deepest connections can arise from the most unexpected places. If you, like us, were moved and were touched by this journey of secrets, pain, and finally hope, and stayed with us until this exact moment, know that you are part of our community. To help us continue bringing powerful stories like this, which make us reflect and feel, we ask for your support. First, if you are not yet part of our family, subscribe now to the channel and activate the bell to be the first to know when a new story is aired. Second, your like is critical. He tells YouTube that this story has value and takes it to more people who need to hear it. Please leave your like. Third, we want to know who the real fans have come to the end. Show your strength, commenting on the secret phrase, "I watched till the end." It's our way of knowing who really plunged into the story with us. And lastly, the journey need not end here. There is another amazing story, full of twists and emotions, waiting for you. Click on the video that is appearing now on your screen, and we will continue this conversation. Thanks for watching. We see each other in the next story.